The shocking truth: you've already met more narcissists than you think. Let me start with something unsettling. The most dangerous narcissist you'll ever meet is not loud, not cruel, not obviously toxic. They don't look like villains, they don't announce themselves, they smile, they listen, they charm you. And chances are, you've already let one into your life. Maybe they were the coworker everyone admired, the partner who felt too perfect in the beginning, the boss who inspired you, until you slowly began to doubt yourself. Or maybe it was someone closer, someone who knew exactly how to make you feel special, seen, chosen, before making you feel small, confused, and invisible. Here's the part most people aren't ready to hear. You don't run into narcissists by accident. Statistically, more than 1 out of every 5 adults shows strong narcissistic patterns. That means in your workplace, your dating pool, your social circle, your family, there is almost certainly at least one narcissist already there. Possibly more. And the truly shocking part: most people don't realize it until after the damage is done. Because narcissism doesn't begin with cruelty, it begins with connection. It begins with intensity that feels like chemistry, with attention that feels like intimacy, with confidence that feels like safety. At first, it feels like finally being understood. They ask the right questions, they mirror your values, they seem emotionally intelligent, driven, passionate. You feel chosen, seen, important. You tell yourself, this feels different, this feels rare, and in a way, you're right, it is rare. But not in the way you think. What you're actually experiencing is not deep connection, it's calculated attunement. Narcissists are experts at reading people. They know how to tune into your hopes, your insecurities, your unmet needs. Not to nurture them, but to use them. And here's where it gets even more uncomfortable. Narcissists don't prey on weak people. They prey on good people. They are drawn to empathy, to ambition, to people who believe in growth, communication, and loyalty. To people who think, if something isn't working, I'll try harder. That's why so many strong, intelligent, self-aware individuals end up trapped in narcissistic dynamics. Not because they're naive, but because they assume everyone plays by the same emotional rules. They don't. A narcissist's inner world is not built on mutuality or truth. It's built on insecurity, entitlement, and a constant need for validation. Underneath the charm is a fragile self-image that must be protected at all costs. And when that protection is threatened, by boundaries, by feedback, by your independence, they don't self-reflect. They retaliate, but they don't do it all at once. First comes subtle confusion, then self-doubt, then emotional exhaustion. You start questioning things you never questioned before. Your memory, your tone, your intentions. You find yourself explaining, defending, overthinking. You feel like you're always almost fixing things but never quite getting there. And you don't even realize what's happening. Because narcissistic harm doesn't feel like an attack. It feels like erosion. Little by little, your confidence shrinks. Your world narrows. Your emotional energy gets redirected toward keeping the peace, avoiding conflict, proving your worth. You become more careful, more accommodating, less yourself. And somewhere along the way, you stop asking the most important question. Why does this relationship feel so hard, even though I'm giving everything I have? This is why narcissism is so dangerous. Not because it's dramatic, but because it's disorienting. It hijacks your empathy. It turns your strengths into vulnerabilities. It keeps you focused on fixing the relationship instead of questioning the dynamic. And by the time most people recognize what they're dealing with, they're already emotionally invested, bonded, or entangled. That's why awareness matters. Because the earlier you recognize narcissistic patterns, the less power they have over you. Once you understand how narcissists operate, how they hook, how they control, how they destabilize, you stop blaming yourself. You stop chasing closure. You stop trying to win a game that was never designed for fairness. And most importantly, you start protecting your peace. In this series, we're going to pull back the curtain. We're going to talk about how to spot narcissists early, how to deal with them without losing yourself, and how to break free from the psychological traps that keep people stuck for years. If you've ever felt confused in a relationship that should have felt loving, if you've ever been told you're too sensitive when something felt deeply wrong, if you've ever wondered how someone could claim to care about you while consistently hurting you, you're not alone. And you're not imagining things. Before we go any further, if this conversation already resonates with you, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. These topics aren't comfortable, but they're necessary, and your support helps us continue creating content that brings clarity, validation, and real tools for emotional freedom. Now let me ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly. Quick question for you. When you think about the most confusing relationship you've ever had, which feels more accurate? A. It started intensely and beautifully, then slowly became exhausting and emotionally draining. B. It was difficult from the beginning, with constant conflict and obvious red flags. Comment A or B below. Your answer matters, and it will shape what we uncover next. Narcissism is not self-love. It's deep self-hatred in disguise. One of the biggest lies we've been taught about narcissism is this, that narcissists love themselves too much. It sounds logical on the surface. They appear confident. They talk about their achievements. They crave admiration. They seem obsessed with how they're seen. So people assume narcissism is excess self-love, ego run wild. But that assumption is not only wrong, it's dangerously misleading. Narcissism is not self-love at all. It is profound self-rejection buried so deeply that it can't be consciously felt, only defended against. At the core of every narcissistic personality is a fragile, unstable sense of self. Not confidence, but shame. Not self-acceptance, but an unbearable feeling of I am not enough. And because that feeling is too painful to face, it gets split off, denied and projected outward. This is why narcissism doesn't look like insecurity, it looks like armor. The grandiosity, the entitlement, the need to be special, these are not signs of strength. They are psychological survival strategies. A narcissist builds an identity that says, I am superior, because the alternative, I am flawed, ordinary, or unlovable, feels annihilating. This is also why narcissists cannot tolerate criticism, even when it's mild or constructive. What looks like arrogance is actually terror. Any feedback that threatens their self-image doesn't land as information, it lands as an existential attack. When you say, that hurt me, they don't hear concern, they hear exposure, and exposure is the enemy. So they deflect. They rage, they minimize, they blame, they rewrite reality. Not because they are calculating in the moment, but because their psyche has learned one rule above all others: never feel the shame. This internal war shapes everything about how they relate to others. A narcissist does not see people as separate emotional beings with inner lives. They see people as mirrors, sources of validation, extensions of themselves, tools to regulate their self-esteem. When the mirror reflects admiration, they feel powerful. When it reflects disappointment or independence, they feel threatened. That's when the mask slips. This is why narcissists oscillate between idealization and devaluation. At first, you are special, not because they truly see you, but because you make them feel special. You are placed on a pedestal because you're serving a function, reinforcing their self-image. But the moment you assert a boundary, express a need, or show a flaw of your own, the illusion cracks. You are no longer a perfect mirror. And instead of adjusting their expectations, they attack the mirror. Suddenly, you're too sensitive, too demanding, too emotional, too much. What's actually happening is not judgment, it's projection. The qualities they despise most in themselves, neediness, vulnerability, imperfection, are the very things they punish in others. It's safer to see those traits as flaws in you than to acknowledge them within themselves. This is also why narcissists often appear emotionally cold during moments that require empathy. It's not that they don't understand emotions. Many narcissists are highly perceptive. They can read people with uncanny accuracy. What they lack is emotional access. To feel empathy requires the ability to tolerate vulnerability, yours and theirs. And vulnerability is precisely what their psyche is organized to avoid. So instead of meeting emotion with care, they meet it with irritation, dismissal, or control. And here's the paradox that confuses so many people. Narcissists can talk about feelings beautifully. They can sound insightful, self-aware, even remorseful. But words are not the same as emotional integration. Insight without accountability changes nothing. Apologies without behavioral change are just another form of self-protection. This is why people often stay stuck trying to reach the narcissist. They see flashes of humanity, moments of charm, occasional softness, and they think, that's the real person. If I can just get back there. But that version is not stable. It's not grounded. It's conditional. The narcissist's inner world is governed by a constant hunger for external validation because there is no internal source of self-worth. No steady sense of I am okay as I am. That's why admiration feels like oxygen, and why its absence feels like suffocation. And this brings us to an important truth that's both sobering and freeing. You cannot love someone into self-worth. No amount of reassurance, loyalty, patience, or sacrifice can heal a wound the narcissist refuses to acknowledge. In fact, the more you give, the more they unconsciously resent you because your generosity highlights what they lack internally. This is also why narcissists often sabotage healthy intimacy. Real closeness requires mutual vulnerability, mutual accountability, and mutual growth. But growth requires self-confrontation, and self-confrontation threatens the very defenses that keep them psychologically intact. So instead of evolving, they control. Instead of repairing, they dominate. Instead of reflecting, they deflect. Understanding this changes everything. It shifts the question from, why aren't I enough for them? To, why would I expect someone who hates themselves to treat me with consistent care? This is not about excusing harmful behavior. It's about seeing it clearly. When you stop mistaking narcissism for confidence, you stop chasing validation from someone who can never truly give it, and something powerful happens when you see through the disguise. You stop taking the cruelty personally. You stop internalizing the blame. You stop arguing with someone who is fighting a battle you were never meant to fight. Narcissism is not self-love gone wrong. It is self-hatred that has learned how to perform. And once you understand that, you're no longer hypnotized by the performance. The mask, why narcissists often look charming, charismatic, and successful. If narcissists looked cruel from the beginning, very few people would ever get close to them. But that's not how it works. The most disorienting thing about narcissism is not the cruelty that comes later. It's the brilliance that comes first, the confidence, the magnetism, the sense that this person has figured life out in a way others haven't. They walk into a room and people notice. They speak and people listen. They seem composed, articulate, decisive. In a world full of uncertainty, they feel like certainty. That is not an accident. Narcissists learn early, often unconsciously, that image is survival. If their inner world feels unstable or empty, then the outer world must be controlled. The mask becomes the self they show the world, not as deception in the cartoonish sense, but as a carefully constructed identity designed to command admiration and avoid vulnerability. Charm is not a personality trait for them. It's a tool. Charisma functions the same way. It is not about connection. It is about influence. A narcissist knows how to read social energy, how to say what people want to hear, how to mirror values and enthusiasm just enough to create instant rapport. They don't charm everyone equally, they charm strategically. The people they admire, the people they want something from, the people who reflect well on them, those are the ones who get the full performance. This is why so many narcissists rise quickly in careers, leadership roles, and public-facing positions. Environments that reward confidence over character, visibility over integrity, and performance over consistency are especially fertile ground. In those spaces, humility is quiet, but narcissism is loud, and loud often looks like leadership. A narcissist is rarely afraid to speak up. They project certainty even when they don't have it. They take credit easily. They frame themselves as indispensable. To an untrained eye, this reads as competence. To a stressed organization or an uncertain partner, it feels like relief. Finally, someone who seems to know what they're doing. But the mask has limits. Because what's missing beneath the charm is not intelligence or ambition, it's depth. Depth requires introspection. Depth requires the ability to sit with doubt, responsibility, and emotional complexity. The narcissistic mask avoids all of that. It is polished on the outside precisely because the inside is too fragile to expose. This is why the charm often fades when circumstances change, when success is no longer guaranteed, when admiration turns into expectation, when closeness demands reciprocity instead of applause. That's when cracks appear. The same person who was captivating in public becomes dismissive in private. The same confidence that inspired you starts to feel rigid, defensive, even contemptuous. Questions become challenges. Needs become inconveniences. Disagreement becomes disrespect. And you're left wondering how someone so impressive can feel so emotionally unavailable. The answer is simple but unsettling. The mask was never meant for intimacy. Narcissists can perform connection, but they struggle to sustain it. Performance requires energy and control. Intimacy requires surrender. And surrender is precisely what the mask exists to prevent. This is also why narcissists often surround themselves with symbols of success, status, attractiveness, wealth, influence. These are not enjoyed quietly. They are displayed, curated, highlighted, because they serve a psychological purpose, reinforcing the illusion that the mask is real. If others admire me, then I must be worthy. If I am envied, then I am safe. If I am exceptional, then I never have to feel ordinary. Ordinariness to a narcissist feels like annihilation. This doesn't mean every charismatic or successful person is narcissistic. That distinction matters. The difference lies not in confidence, but in how they respond when the spotlight moves away. A healthy person can be admired without needing it. They can lead without dominating. They can succeed without diminishing others. Their sense of self remains stable whether they are praised or not. A narcissist cannot tolerate that shift. When attention fades, they escalate. When admiration dips, they provoke. When their status is questioned, they attack or withdraw. The mask must be constantly reinforced because without it, there is nothing solid underneath. This is why people close to narcissists often experience a strange duality: public admiration and private confusion. Outsiders see the charm, insiders feel the cost, and when insiders speak up, they're often dismissed because the mask is more convincing than the truth. Understanding the mask is not about becoming cynical. It's about becoming discerning. Charm is not evidence of character. Confidence is not proof of safety. Success does not equal emotional maturity. The mask works because we are taught to trust appearances. Narcissists exploit that cultural shortcut. But once you know what you're looking at, the spell breaks. You begin to notice what's missing beneath the shine. The lack of curiosity about your inner world, the discomfort with accountability, the way everything subtly revolves around them, the way admiration flows in one direction but care does not. And when you see that clearly, charm loses its power. Because the most important question is no longer, how impressive are they? It becomes, how do I feel when the performance stops? That's where the truth always lives. How to spot a narcissist: early red flags. Most people ignore. Most people don't miss narcissistic red flags because they're careless. They miss them because the red flags don't feel dangerous at first. They feel flattering, exciting, intense. They show up wrapped in chemistry, ambition, and apparent emotional depth. And because we are wired to seek connection, we tend to interpret early discomfort as our own fear rather than as valuable information. Spotting a narcissist early isn't about looking for cruelty. It's about noticing patterns that quietly center everything around them before you're emotionally invested. One of the earliest red flags is accelerated intimacy. Things move fast, not organically but insistently. Deep conversations arrive early. Declarations of connection feel premature. You're told implicitly or explicitly that this bond is special, rare, different from anything they've had before. At first it feels romantic, but pay attention to how your nervous system responds. Do you feel grounded or slightly overwhelmed? Do you feel chosen or subtly rushed? Narcissistic intimacy is not about mutual discovery. It's about fast-tracking attachment before discernment has a chance to catch up. Another overlooked red flag is excessive self-focus disguised as vulnerability. They may talk a lot about their past, especially about how they were misunderstood, mistreated, or unappreciated. Former partners are framed as crazy, cruel, or incompetent. Bosses were unfair. Friends betrayed them. There is always a story, and in every story they are the victim or the hero, but never the one who contributed to the outcome. This isn't the same as sharing pain. Healthy vulnerability includes self-reflection. Narcissistic storytelling avoids responsibility. If you notice a consistent lack of accountability, take it seriously. People who cannot reflect early will not reflect later. A third red flag shows up in how they respond to boundaries, even small ones. You say you're tired. They push for more time. You ask for space. They interpret it as rejection. You disagree gently. They become defensive, sarcastic, or cold. Early boundary violations are rarely dramatic. They come as jokes, guilt, or subtle pressure. I just miss you. You're overthinking. I thought you were different. These responses train you to prioritize their comfort over your clarity. Another sign people overlook is performative empathy. Narcissists often know the language of emotions. They can say the right things, ask the right questions, and sound deeply understanding. But notice what happens when empathy requires action or consistency. Do they remember what matters to you? Do they follow through? Do they adjust their behavior when you express discomfort? Empathy without change is not empathy. It's impression management. Pay close attention, too, to how they handle frustration. Early stress reveals more than early charm. Missed plans, minor inconveniences, waiting, being told no. These moments offer a glimpse beneath the mask. A narcissist often reacts to frustration with disproportionate irritation, entitlement, or blame. The world, in their eyes, should cooperate with them. This may show up as impatience with service workers, exaggerated complaints, or subtle contempt for people they perceive as less important. These moments are easy to excuse, many people do. But how someone treats others when there is nothing to gain tells you everything. Another quiet red flag is inconsistency between words and energy. They may say they value honesty but react badly to truth. They may claim to love communication but shut down when it's inconvenient. They may praise your independence then punish you for exercising it. This inconsistency creates confusion, and confusion is not accidental. When your internal compass starts wobbling, you're more likely to look to them for direction. There is also the red flag of subtle competition. Your successes are acknowledged briefly, then redirected back to them. Your joy is tolerated, not celebrated. Your growth feels like it threatens something unspoken. Narcissists struggle to be genuinely happy for others unless it reflects well on them. And perhaps the most ignored red flag of all. You feel the need to explain yourself too much. You clarify harmless comments. You defend neutral intentions. You find yourself rehearsing conversations in your head, trying to avoid misunderstandings that seem to keep happening anyway. This is not communication improving, it's self-erasure beginning. Healthy relationships simplify you. Narcissistic dynamics complicate you. None of these signs alone confirm narcissism. But patterns matter, and your emotional experience matters. Discomfort is not something to override, it's something to investigate. Spotting a narcissist early requires one difficult shift, trusting your internal signals more than the narrative you're being sold. Chemistry does not equal safety, intensity does not equal intimacy, and potential does not equal reality. The earlier you notice these red flags, the less power they have, because narcissism thrives on delay, on benefit of the doubt, on second chances given too quickly, on your hope that understanding will fix what awareness is trying to warn you about. Learning to spot narcissism early isn't about becoming guarded. It's about becoming clear. And clarity, unlike charm, never lies. The narcissistic relationship cycle, why it feels addictive and confusing. If you've ever asked yourself, why was it so hard to leave even when I knew something was wrong? The answer is not weakness, it's conditioning. Narcissistic relationships are not chaotic by accident. They follow a psychological cycle that hijacks your nervous system, distorts your perception of reality, and creates a bond that feels intense, meaningful, and nearly impossible to break, even when the relationship is clearly harming you. What makes this cycle so dangerous is that it doesn't feel abusive while you're inside it. It feels addictive. It begins with a phase that feels almost cinematic. You feel seen in a way you never have before. Conversations are deep, fast, and emotionally charged. There's a sense of destiny, of alignment, of finally. The attention is focused, validating, and intoxicating. Your brain releases dopamine and oxytocin, the same chemicals involved in bonding and attachment. This is not love forming. This is attachment being engineered. The intensity creates a powerful emotional imprint. Your nervous system learns very quickly this person equals relief, excitement, and belonging. And because it happens early, before trust is earned, it bypasses your ability to evaluate the relationship realistically. Then, subtly, something shifts. The warmth becomes inconsistent. The attunement fades. The affection feels conditional. You start noticing small criticisms, dismissals, or emotional withdrawals that weren't there before. They may still be charming, but now it's unpredictable. Sometimes they're close, sometimes they're distant, sometimes they're loving, sometimes they're cold. And your mind starts working overtime. You analyze your words, your tone, your behavior. You replay conversations, searching for the moment you might have ruined things. You tell yourself they're stressed, overwhelmed, misunderstood. You focus on getting back to the version of them that felt so good in the beginning. This is where confusion sets in. Your body remembers the high of the early connection, but your present experience feels unstable. That contrast creates anxiety, and anxiety bonds. The unpredictability keeps you emotionally engaged. You're no longer relating to who they are now. You're chasing who they were before. This is the core of the addiction. The narcissist, consciously or not, controls access to connection. They decide when you feel close and when you feel shut out. And because the closeness once felt so powerful, you tolerate the distance far longer than you should. Then comes the emotional rupture. This may look like a sudden withdrawal, a blow-up, a betrayal, or a period of silence. Communication breaks down. You feel discarded, devalued, or replaced. Your sense of safety collapses. The bond feels threatened, and your nervous system panics. This is not heartbreak alone. It is attachment trauma. And just when the pain peaks, when you start pulling away or questioning the relationship, something happens. They return. The tone softens. The charm resurfaces. They apologize partially. They reminisce about the beginning. They promise change, growth, a future where things will be different. They remind you of the connection you once had, or could have again. This is not repair. It is reinforcement. The relief you feel when they come back is intense. Your brain links reconnection with safety. The cycle completes itself and the bond deepens, not because things improved, but because your nervous system survived a threat. Over time, this loop repeats. Each round erodes your clarity. You start doubting your judgment. You normalize instability. You tell yourself relationships are hard, that love requires patience, that you're asking for too much. And slowly, your sense of self shifts. You become more focused on managing the relationship than living your life. Your emotional range narrows. Your world revolves around their moods, their needs, their approval. You may even feel grateful for moments of basic kindness because the baseline has dropped so low. This is why narcissistic relationships feel so confusing from the inside and so obvious from the outside. Friends see the pattern, you feel the pull. What keeps people stuck is not hope, it's conditioning. The cycle trains you to associate love with anxiety, relief with reconciliation, and pain with connection. It blurs the line between intensity and intimacy. And here is the most important truth to understand. Closure does not come from the narcissist. It comes from recognizing the cycle. Once you see the pattern, the confusion begins to dissolve. You realize the good times were not proof of potential. They were part of the mechanism. The inconsistency was not accidental. It was the hook. Breaking free is not about understanding them better. It's about understanding what the cycle did to you. And when you do, something powerful happens. You stop chasing the highs. You stop internalizing the lows. You stop mistaking survival for love. Because real connection does not feel like withdrawal, confusion, or emotional gambling. It feels steady, it feels safe, and it does not require you to lose yourself to keep it alive. Gaslighting. Explained. How your reality gets slowly erased. Gaslighting is not loud. It does not arrive as a dramatic lie or an obvious attack on your sanity. It arrives quietly, through doubt. At first it feels like confusion, a strange sense that conversations don't land the way you remember them, that your intentions are misunderstood, that your feelings are somehow wrong, excessive, or inconvenient. You begin explaining yourself more carefully, choosing words more precisely, trying harder to be fair. You don't realize it yet, but something subtle is happening. Your trust in yourself is being dismantled. Gaslighting is not a single moment where someone denies a fact. It is a process of erosion, a slow, repeated destabilization of your perception until you stop relying on your own inner compass and start outsourcing reality to the very person distorting it. That's what makes it so powerful and so dangerous. In narcissistic dynamics, gaslighting serves a specific function: control without force. If a narcissist can make you doubt your memory, your feelings, or your judgment, they no longer have to argue, explain, or take responsibility. Your uncertainty does the work for them. It often begins innocently enough. You bring up something that hurt you. They respond with surprise. That's not what happened. Or confusion. You're reading into things. Or concern disguised as care. Are you sure you're not being a little sensitive? None of these statements are explosive. In fact, they can sound reasonable. But notice what they do. They shift the focus away from the behavior and onto your perception. And because you're a reasonable person, you consider the possibility that you might be wrong. This is where gaslighting takes root. Over time, the responses escalate. What started as gentle dismissal becomes pattern. Your memories are questioned. Your emotions are reframed as flaws. Your reactions are labeled as overreactions. You are told you're imagining things, misremembering, exaggerating, or projecting. And slowly, something changes inside you. You stop asserting. You start asking. Did I misunderstand? Maybe I shouldn't have brought it up. Am I being unfair? Gaslighting works not because the narcissist is more convincing than you, but because they are more persistent. Reality becomes a negotiation you're always losing, not because you're wrong, but because you're tired. One of the most insidious aspects of gaslighting is that it often includes partial truths. The narcissist may admit to minor details while denying the core issue. They may acknowledge your feelings while invalidating the cause. "I'm sorry you feel that way" replaces "I'm sorry I did that." This creates the illusion of accountability while preserving denial. Another common tactic is deflection through accumulation. You raise one concern. They respond by bringing up unrelated issues, things from the past, imagined slights or vague accusations. The conversation becomes scattered. You find yourself defending multiple points at once, forgetting why you spoke up in the first place. By the end, you're exhausted, and the original issue remains unresolved. Gaslighting also feeds on timing. It happens when you're already vulnerable, after an argument, during stress, or when you care deeply about maintaining the relationship. In those moments, clarity feels risky. Disagreement feels like abandonment, and self-trust feels negotiable. This is how people begin to shrink. You stop sharing your thoughts freely. You censor your emotions. You keep mental notes instead of speaking up, because speaking up only leads to confusion or conflict. You learn to tolerate discomfort quietly, telling yourself it's easier than trying to explain something that never seems to be understood. Eventually, the most damaging shift occurs. You begin to see yourself the way the narcissist sees you. Unstable, difficult, too emotional, hard to please. You may even wonder if you are the narcissist. This is not coincidence. Gaslighting doesn't just erase reality, it replaces it with self-blame. If everything is your fault, then nothing requires them to change. And here's the cruel irony. The more empathetic and self-reflective you are, the more effective gaslighting becomes. You are willing to question yourself. You are open to feedback. You care about being fair. Those qualities become weapons against you. The narcissist, meanwhile, remains remarkably certain of their version, certain of their innocence, certain that you are the problem. That certainty can feel grounding when your own inner ground has been destabilized. That's why gaslighting feels like losing yourself slowly rather than suddenly. You don't wake up one day feeling erased. You wake up feeling unsure, and uncertainty is fertile ground for control. The turning point begins when you notice one simple thing. Gaslighting requires repetition. It cannot survive a single moment of clarity, but it thrives on many moments of doubt. The moment you stop arguing about facts and start observing patterns, the spell weakens. The moment you stop trying to convince them and start trusting your internal signals, your reality begins to return. Gaslighting collapses when you no longer need their agreement to validate your experience. Because the truth is this: if you consistently feel confused, diminished, or disoriented after conversations with someone, the issue is not your perception. It's the environment. And reclaiming your reality is not about proving anything. It's about remembering who you were before you started doubting yourself. That memory is still there. It's just been waiting for you to listen again. Why you can't change a narcissist, and why trying breaks you. One of the most painful realizations in a narcissistic relationship is not what they did to you. It's what you believed you could fix. Most people don't enter these dynamics thinking, "I'll sacrifice myself." They enter thinking, "If I communicate better, if I'm patient, if I love more clearly, things will change." That belief feels mature, compassionate, hopeful. It is also the trap. Trying to change a narcissist doesn't fail because you didn't try hard enough. It fails because change threatens the very structure that keeps them psychologically intact. Change requires self-awareness. Self-awareness requires accountability. Accountability requires facing shame. And that is the one thing a narcissistic personality is organized to avoid. At their core, narcissists are not resistant to feedback because they are stubborn. They are resistant because feedback destabilizes their identity. To truly change, they would have to admit fault without externalizing blame, sit with discomfort without retaliating, and tolerate the idea that they are not who they need to appear to be. That level of internal work requires humility and sustained commitment. It requires daily self-regulation, consistent therapy, and a willingness to confront deeply painful truths. Most narcissists don't want that. And more importantly, they don't believe they need it. So when you try to help, guide, or work through things, something predictable happens. Your efforts are reframed as attacks. Your needs are labeled as demands. Your boundaries are interpreted as punishments. And slowly the conversation shifts. It stops being about their behavior and becomes about your reaction to it. This is where people start breaking. You begin by explaining, then clarifying, then softening, then apologizing for bringing things up at all. You lower your expectations. You choose your battles. You tell yourself you're being understanding, flexible, mature. But what you're actually doing is contorting yourself to preserve a system that cannot tolerate equality. Narcissistic relationships do not operate on mutual growth. They operate on imbalance. One person adapts. The other remains fixed. One person reflects. The other deflects. One person carries emotional responsibility. The other resists it. And the longer you try to change them, the more that imbalance deepens. Because every attempt you make teaches them something dangerous. That you will stay, even when your needs are unmet. This is why trying to change a narcissist doesn't just fail, it actively harms you. Your nervous system stays in a constant state of activation. You are always monitoring, adjusting, anticipating. Your emotional energy is invested in managing outcomes instead of living your life. Over time, you become exhausted, anxious, and disconnected from your own instincts. You may even lose touch with who you were before the relationship. This is not because you are weak, it's because you were doing the work of two people. There's also a subtle psychological shift that happens when you take on the role of the one who understands. You start believing that if you just explain things the right way, they'll finally see you. That insight will unlock empathy. That love will soften them. But insight without willingness changes nothing. A narcissist may intellectually understand what you're saying. They may repeat it back. They may even agree in moments of calm. But agreement is not integration. Understanding is not transformation. And promises are not progress. Change is not something you extract from someone through effort. It is something they choose, consistently, privately, and without being forced. This is why ultimatums rarely work long-term. They may produce short bursts of improved behavior, but not structural change. The motivation is external, fear of loss, not internal responsibility. And once the threat passes, the old patterns return. Meanwhile, you are left questioning yourself. Why isn't this working? Why does it feel like I'm asking for too much? Why am I always the one compromising? This is where the deepest damage occurs, not in the conflict, but in the self-abandonment. Trying to change a narcissist teaches you to override your own reality, to tolerate emotional inconsistency, to accept explanations instead of actions, to believe that your exhaustion is the price of love. It is not. The truth most people resist is also the one that sets them free. You cannot change someone who does not experience their behavior as a problem, and accepting that is not giving up. It is waking up. When you stop trying to change them, something profound happens. Your energy returns, your clarity sharpens. You begin asking a different question, not, how do I fix this, but what is this costing me? And in that moment, the dynamic shifts, because the power you were giving away, through effort, patience, hope, comes back to you. You stop negotiating your worth. You stop auditioning for care. You stop shrinking to make someone else comfortable. Letting go of the fantasy of change is painful. It means grieving not just the relationship, but the version of it you believed in, the future you imagined, the effort you invested. But that grief is clean. What breaks people is not leaving narcissistic relationships. What breaks them is staying, while slowly disappearing. You were never meant to save someone by losing yourself. And the moment you stop trying to change them is the moment you begin to heal. How to deal with narcissists. When you can't walk away. Not every narcissistic relationship can be escaped. Sometimes the narcissist is your boss, a co-parent, a family member, someone tied to your finances, your children, or your livelihood. And hearing just leave doesn't help, because you can't. When walking away isn't an option, survival requires a different kind of strength. Not confrontation, not explanation, not emotional honesty in the way healthy relationships encourage. What it requires is strategic clarity. The first and most difficult shift is this. You must stop expecting emotional reciprocity. A narcissist cannot meet you in mutual understanding, no matter how clearly you communicate. When you continue to expect fairness, empathy, or accountability, you stay emotionally exposed. Acceptance is not approval. It is seeing the terrain accurately. Once you accept who they are, not who they could be, you stop bleeding energy into impossible conversations. You stop explaining your pain to someone who uses it as leverage. You stop trying to be understood by someone invested in misunderstanding you. This is where emotional boundaries matter more than verbal ones. You don't need to announce boundaries to a narcissist. In fact, doing so often escalates conflict. Instead, boundaries are enforced through behavioral limits. Shorter conversations, neutral responses, predictable routines, reduced emotional disclosure. You give them less material. This approach is often called emotional detachment. Not because you stop caring, but because you stop feeding the dynamic. Narcissists thrive on reaction. Anger, tears, explanations, unknown defenses. These confirm their importance. Calm neutrality starves the system. This doesn't mean being cold, it means being contained. You also need to radically simplify communication. Keep it factual, brief, grounded in logistics rather than emotion. When possible, remove tone from the equation. Narcissists weaponize tone because it allows them to avoid substance. You are not there to convince. You are there to minimize damage. Another crucial skill is learning to disengage from bait. Narcissists provoke to regain control through accusations, guilt, or sudden crises. Not every statement requires a response. Silence, delay, or a simple acknowledgement without engagement can be powerful. Disengagement is not weakness, it is discernment. Internally, the work is just as important. Living with unavoidable narcissistic exposure means you must anchor your sense of reality somewhere outside the relationship. Trusted friends, therapy, journaling, objective records. You need places where your experience is reflected back accurately, so gaslighting doesn't take root. Without that grounding, you begin shrinking. You also need to grieve something quietly but honestly. The relationship you will never have with this person. Not the relationship you wish they could become, but the one that requires mutual care. Grief clears fantasy. Fantasy keeps you trapped. Finally, you must choose yourself in small, consistent ways. Protect your time. Protect your sleep. Protect your inner world. Narcissistic dynamics are exhausting because they demand constant emotional vigilance. Recovery begins when your life no longer revolves around managing their reactions. You are allowed to be peaceful, even if they are not. Dealing with a narcissist you can't leave is not about winning. It's about preserving yourself. You don't owe them access to your emotions. You don't owe them understanding. You don't owe them the version of you that keeps getting hurt. And even in constrained circumstances, one truth remains. You can limit their influence, you can reclaim your clarity, and you can live a life that is bigger than the space they occupy. That is not resignation, that is quiet power. The hidden impact, what narcissistic abuse does to your mind and body. Narcissistic abuse doesn't always leave visible scars. What it leaves instead is something far more confusing and far more enduring. It changes how you think. It changes how you feel inside your own body. And for a long time, you may not even realize what's happening. Many people come out of narcissistic dynamics saying the same thing. I don't feel like myself anymore. That feeling is not imagined. It is the result of prolonged psychological stress that slowly rewires both the mind and the nervous system. Living in a narcissistic environment means living in unpredictability. One moment you're valued, the next you're dismissed. One day you feel close, the next you feel invisible. Your body never knows what to expect, and the nervous system responds by staying on high alert. This is where the damage begins. Your brain learns that safety is temporary. That connection can disappear without warning. Over time, this creates chronic anxiety, not the loud, obvious kind, but a low-level tension that never fully shuts off. You may feel restless, hyper-aware, or constantly on edge, even when nothing is actively wrong. Your body remembers what your mind tries to minimize. Sleep often becomes disrupted. Thoughts loop at night. Conversations replay. You wake up exhausted even after resting. Cortisol, the stress hormone, stays elevated, affecting everything from digestion to immune function. Headaches, muscle tension, stomach issues, heart palpitations, these are not random. They are stress responses. Emotionally, narcissistic abuse fragments your sense of self. Because your reality was repeatedly questioned, you may struggle with self-trust. Decisions feel heavier. Confidence feels fragile. You second-guess your instincts. Even small choices can feel overwhelming because you've learned that being wrong comes with emotional consequences. There is also a profound sense of grief that many people don't recognize as grief. You are not just mourning the relationship, you are mourning the version of yourself that felt open, expressive, spontaneous. People often describe a kind of emotional numbness after narcissistic abuse, not because they don't care, but because caring felt unsafe for too long. Shutting down becomes a form of protection. Joy may feel muted. Motivation may fade. You may lose interest in things that once mattered to you. This is not depression caused by weakness. It is a nervous system trying to recover. There is also something deeply isolating about this kind of harm. Because narcissistic abuse is subtle, survivors often feel misunderstood. Others may not see the manipulation, the erosion, the psychological toll. You may hear things like, "It wasn't that bad," or "Why didn't you just leave?" And so you carry it alone. But the body keeps score. Even after the relationship ends, or even when you're still trapped in it, your system continues to respond as if danger is nearby. Loud voices, sudden changes in tone, perceived disapproval. These can trigger intense reactions that feel disproportionate to the present moment. This is trauma, even if it doesn't fit the stereotypes. The good news, the part many people need to hear, is that this damage is not permanent. Your nervous system learned these patterns in order to survive. That means it can also learn safety again. But healing doesn't begin with understanding the narcissist. It begins with tending to yourself, your body, your boundaries, your inner signals. When you start listening to your exhaustion instead of pushing through it. When you stop dismissing your anxiety as overreacting. When you honor the fact that something real happened to you. Your system begins to exhale. Recovery is not about becoming who you were before. It's about becoming someone who feels safe in their own skin again. And that is not a small thing. Healing and rebuilding. How to protect yourself. Going forward, healing after narcissistic abuse is not about becoming stronger so it never happens again. It's about becoming clearer about yourself, about others, and about what safety actually feels like. For many people, the instinct after narcissistic harm is hypervigilance. You scan for red flags everywhere. You doubt your judgment. You wonder if trusting again is dangerous. This response makes sense. Your system learned that connection came with a cost, but protection rooted in fear will keep you guarded. Protection rooted in clarity will keep you free. Rebuilding begins with restoring self-trust. Narcissistic dynamics teach you to outsource your instincts, to question your reactions, to rely on someone else's version of reality. Healing reverses that process. It means taking your inner signals seriously again, especially the quiet ones. Discomfort is not something to override. Calm is not something to second guess. As you heal, you'll notice a shift in what you're drawn to. Intensity loses its appeal. Consistency starts to feel attractive. People who once felt boring may suddenly feel grounding. This isn't settling, it's recalibration. One of the most important protections going forward is learning to recognize green flags, not just red ones. Healthy people don't rush intimacy. They let connection unfold. They respect boundaries without resentment. They can hear no without punishment. They take responsibility without collapsing or attacking. They are curious about your inner world, not threatened by it. Most importantly, they make room for you. Rebuilding also requires a different relationship with boundaries. Boundaries are not walls. They are filters. They help you decide who gets access to your time, energy, and emotional world. You don't need to justify them. You don't need to negotiate them. You don't need to explain them to be allowed to have them. Boundaries protect your nervous system. And a regulated nervous system is your greatest defense against manipulation. Another essential part of healing is learning to tolerate healthy discomfort. Growth will sometimes feel unfamiliar. Safe relationships may feel slower. Conflict may be addressed directly instead of dramatically. This can feel strange at first if chaos once felt like connection. Give yourself time to adjust. Healing also means releasing the belief that you need to prove your worth through endurance. You no longer have to earn care by being patient, understanding, or endlessly forgiving. You are allowed to leave situations that drain you, even if no one else understands why. Protection is not isolation, it's discernment. As you rebuild, you may grieve, not just the relationship, but the years spent doubting yourself. That grief deserves space, but it does not define your future. Awareness changes the trajectory. You are not damaged, you are informed, and that information gives you something powerful. Choice. You get to choose relationships that feel mutual, conversations that feel safe, environments where you don't have to shrink to survive. You get to choose a life where peace is not something you earn, but something you prioritize. Healing does not make you naive. It makes you anchored. And from that place, you don't need to protect yourself by closing your heart. You protect yourself by staying connected to it. The bigger picture. Why learning about narcissism sets you free. At some point in the healing process, something shifts. You stop asking, why did this happen to me? And you start asking, what do I see now that I couldn't see before? That shift is freedom. Learning about narcissism is not about becoming suspicious of everyone. It's not about labeling people or rewriting your past in bitterness. It's about context. And context changes everything. Before awareness, the pain felt personal. You assumed the breakdowns in communication were your fault. You believed that if you were clearer, calmer, more patient, more loving, things would stabilize. You internalized the chaos and tried to manage it from the inside. After awareness, the story changes. You begin to see patterns instead of isolated moments. You recognize dynamics instead of blaming character flaws in yourself. You understand that what confused you wasn't complexity. It was inconsistency designed to keep you off balance. And that understanding releases you from the need to keep explaining yourself to the past. One of the most liberating aspects of learning about narcissism is realizing that you were responding normally to an abnormal situation. The anxiety, the rumination, the exhaustion. Those were not signs of weakness. They were signals that your system was under strain. That realization restores dignity. It also gives you language. Language turns vague suffering into something you can name. And once something has a name, it no longer controls you in silence. You can talk about it, set boundaries around it, walk away from it sooner. Knowledge doesn't harden you, it clarifies you. Another piece of freedom comes from releasing the fantasy of resolution. Many people stay emotionally tethered to narcissistic relationships long after they end because they're waiting for understanding, remorse, or closure. Learning about narcissism teaches you a difficult but peaceful truth. Closure does not come from the person who harmed you, it comes from comprehension. When you understand the limitations of that personality structure, you stop expecting what was never available. And in that moment, the grip loosens. You also stop seeing yourself as the one who failed. You see yourself as someone who stayed hopeful in an environment that rewarded hope with confusion. You stayed because you believed in connection, repair, and growth. Those are not flaws, they are values. Awareness allows you to keep those values without sacrificing yourself. Zooming out even further, learning about narcissism reshapes how you move through the world. You become more attuned to energy than words, to patterns over promises, to how relationships feel in your body, not just how they look on paper. You begin choosing peace over intensity, consistency over charm, respect over potential. And perhaps most importantly, you stop trying to prove your worth to people who benefit from you doubting it. Freedom doesn't mean you'll never encounter narcissistic behavior again. It means you won't stay confused when you do. You'll recognize the signs. You'll trust your internal signals. You'll disengage earlier with less drama and more self-respect. You'll no longer need to demonize or diagnose. You'll simply choose distance. Learning about narcissism is not about living in opposition to others. It's about coming back into alignment with yourself. It's about reclaiming your intuition, your energy, your right to feel safe in connection. And once you have that, something quiet but powerful settles in. You stop chasing explanations. You stop negotiating reality. You stop shrinking to maintain proximity. You live more honestly, more selectively, more freely. Because the biggest picture isn't about them at all. It's about you. Finally standing on solid ground, no longer wondering why it felt so hard to be yourself, and realizing that clarity was the key all along. Closing reflection. What this story was really about. When you step back and look at the full arc of this story, something important becomes clear. This was never just a story about a narcissist. It was a story about awakening. At the beginning, the connection felt magnetic, intense, meaningful. It carried the promise of being seen, chosen, and valued. And when that promise slowly unraveled into confusion, self-doubt, and emotional exhaustion, the instinct was to search inward for answers, to fix, to try harder, to explain more clearly, to love more patiently. But the deeper truth revealed itself over time. The problem was never a lack of effort or worth. The problem was a dynamic that required one person to disappear in order for the other to feel powerful. What changed everything was not confrontation, closure, or revenge. It was clarity. Clarity made it possible to name what had once felt impossible to explain. It turned chaos into pattern. It transformed shame into understanding. And most importantly, it returned agency to the person who had slowly lost themselves while trying to preserve the relationship. The deepest lesson in this story is not avoid narcissists at all costs. It's this. Your body and mind know when something is wrong long before your logic catches up. Confusion is not a personal flaw. Exhaustion is not a failure. Losing yourself is not a sign that you weren't strong enough. It's a sign that you were adapting to survive. Applying this lesson to your life today means slowing down when something feels intense but destabilizing. It means valuing consistency over chemistry. It means trusting calm instead of chasing highs. It means understanding that love should expand you, not shrink you. And perhaps most importantly, it means recognizing that walking away from what harms you is not cruelty. It is self-respect. You are not here to earn safety. You are here to live in it. Disclaimer. This video is for educational and informational purposes only and does not replace professional diagnosis or therapy from a licensed mental health professional. Quick question for you. Which do you believe is more important in relationships? A. Strong chemistry and emotional intensity. B. Emotional safety and consistency. Comment A or B below. And what's your perspective after hearing this story? Have you noticed similar patterns, or did something here help you see your own experience more clearly? Share your thoughts in the comments so others can learn from your insight. If this content resonated with you, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your support helps us continue creating honest, thoughtful conversations that bring clarity, healing, and real understanding.